What's up, everyone? Got George and Max here over from the Unqualified Filmbros podcast. We're doing kind of a loner program. So, this is our new segment. This is the Rewatch, where we cover every single MCU project minus Moon
Except
Knight.
Ant-Man.
Oh, well,
No.
we could take out Ant-Man if you
Why
want,
would we skip
but
Ant-Man?
no, it's every project except for Moon Knight, which is finishing up almost as we speak.
Yeah, a few more
It's
episodes, I
during
think. But
a couple more episodes. But we'll have our thoughts on that. Don't worry. But tonight we're covering Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one.
Volume
I
1.
know Volume 1. I know we're both excited about this one. So George, why don't you get us kicked off? What are your thoughts?
First and foremost, good evening, everyone. Um, yeah, this is
So
just,
polite.
it's so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
This one, it's just, you know, you can take it seriously because you've got the threat of Ronan and Thanos. You can take it seriously because it introduces the Power Stone. But you put together that soundtrack, that score, that cast, and that script, and this is a bona fide comedy.
Yeah.
Like, you could call it a superhero movie, you could call it whatever you want, space opera, whatever. It's a comedy. You've got Rocket Raccoon holding a gun for, or a blaster for 3D purposes only, saying, I live for the simple things, like how much this is gonna hurt. You got Peter Quill holding up the orb containing the Power Stone, and then it slips out of his hand, and then he picks it back up, or he catches it. This one, I loved it the first time I saw it, and it somehow has grown on me every single time I've seen it. That said, it does have some flaws. One, it's not long enough. Throw another 15 minutes in there, why not? Just more of the Guardians getting to know each other. This is the first time they're all interacting.
Sure.
Some of the CGI is like, all right, we get it. Some of the story is a little unbelievable, but it's definitely top half MCU, and I go so far as to say it's probably about top 10 for me. We'll get into that later, though.
Yeah, we'll get into rankings and ratings towards the end of the episode. But George, I don't really find a lot wrong with what you just said. I
I like
think,
this one.
yeah, I know we're usually pretty lockstep when it comes to our thoughts on these movies, but I just loved the pacing of the film to start off, right? I think it's fast enough that I'm not getting bogged down in thinking, oh, I'm kind of missing some context to this character or a storyline that I'm following with another character. But it's also not afraid to jump around because that's kind of what the Guardians do. They're bouncing off the walls, they're not organized at all. They're not typical superheroes. And I think that's something the MCU usually excels at is telling stories of superheroes and these extraterrestrial beings that are less than perfect and are less than what we might normally think about when someone says, okay, think about a hero. They're not necessarily morally upstanding, but they do it in a goofy way. And it's
Yeah,
fun and
no,
it's so entertaining.
no one's saying that Peter Quill is Steve Rogers. The whole point of the Guardians of the Galaxy, even from their comic book stories to how they've appeared in now 4 big screen MCU projects, is that they are imperfect, and yet they are greater than the sum of their parts. The only Guardians with an established relationship at this point are Rocket and Groot, and even so, they're bounty hunters. They're not superheroes. They're not even good guys. You got Peter Quill, who's with the Ravagers, abducted from Earth, so he's all kinds of messed up in the head. He's got all sorts of issues. I don't think we're
Hasn't
sugarcoating
had
that.
any proper development past the age of 12 or however old he was when he was taken from Earth.
Yeah, he was just a kid.
Yeah.
You know? And you've got Gamora, who was, again, abducted from her home world by Thanos instead of the Ravagers, but instead of by Yondu. And, she was basically given a similar adolescence as Peter Quill. She was trained by the people who abducted her to do what they needed from her. Peter Quill was trained to steal, Gamora was trained to kill.
Yep.
They're good foils for each other. And then you got Drax, who at first is just kind of there, and by the end of the movie, get this, he's still kind of there. That said, I love the way that Dave Bautista plays the character in this film. I think his sort of the fact that he's not really that great an actor at this point, in 2014, he hadn't really established himself as an actor yet. Still more known for his work in the body contact sport, that arena, no pun intended.
Rugby. You know what you mean? Yep.
But you've got Dave Bautista playing this role, and I think the fact that he's not as well known as Chris Pratt, he's not as well known as Bradley Cooper or Vin Diesel or Zoe Saldana. I think you get beyond the raw element of this is a character who's gone through trauma and pain. He's lost his wife and daughter. He's vulnerable in the sense that he masks his pain with killing. He's Drax the Destroyer. You've got an actor who is capable in this sense of playing all of the strengths of Drax physically, but someone who can also play. You get more of the pain in Guardians too, but we won't get into that. But also like who the character is in his position in the group.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you get a lot of that scene on Nowhere. You get a lot of that during the scene on Nowhere as Drax leaves the group after clearly drinking too much and finds his way to what amounts to a Radio Shack on Nowhere, and essentially messages Ronan and says, "Hey, how are you? Come here, please. I want to fight you because you killed my family." And I think even in his inebriated state, you sort of get the pain and the trauma in a way that gets more fully fleshed out and unpacked in Guardians 2. But it's a nice little window and characterization within the writing for Drax in the first movie, because he clearly isn't. You're right, George. Isn't the main character, and it isn't even really one of the bigger names, and so he doesn't get a ton of individual screen time and story development.
But the way that Bautista plays the role and the way that Drax is written is that despite the secondary nature of the character, he's still able to match Chris Pratt and Bradley Cooper's voice
100%.
in humor, in conversation. So I think that the bottom line for this casting is Dave Bautista works really well for the role.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was just about to say that even though you know and you know that you don't recognize Dave Bautista's name, he doesn't feel out of place at all, really, at any moment within the movie. Part of that, I think, is the writing and the humor that sort of that is associated with this film, which is on the more juvenile side, but it works with who the Guardians are, and it makes total sense.
Well, everything's being processed through Peter Quill's universal translator.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
he left Earth when he was, as we said, a child. So that's
He is a
whose ears
Peon.
are hearing everything.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think before we go to ratings and rankings, I think the one thing we need to talk about is the music.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah.
Just the soundtrack, choosing songs like Hooked on a Feeling, Blue Suede 1973, that song belongs to me, or Come and Get Your Love. It's just, or even Escape, the Pina Colada song, which is used better here than in Shang-Chi, but we'll get into that when we talk about Shang-Chi. The soundtrack is elite because you're getting these songs that, you know, are by this point not even remotely related to the movie. They're classic fun songs. You know, and they've been classic fun songs for decades. 30 years, 40 years in some cases. You get to have a lot of fun with the soundtrack, and then you add in the score, and it complements it so well with how fantastic in terms of fantasy this story is. Because it adds to the, and I don't like using this word because I'm not even sure. I majored in English and I'm not even sure if it's a word, but it adds to the epicness of this film as a score. And the soundtrack is so much fun that you get this really, really cool dichotomy of, dramatic musical score, fun soundtrack that are then meshed together by James Gunn in a way that makes the film work in a really special way.
Yeah. It's just awesome. I'm running out of ways to describe the way that sound and music and score all work so well together, right? Because it's not just the soundtrack is not just something that was put in. I mean, it's so intentional and it means so much to Peter and the characters within the film. Uh, mostly Peter, but it just it adds to the reality that we as the viewers and the watchers of this movie are seeing it through Peter's eyes. And I think that only lends credence and sort of it makes the theory all the more legitimate that we are listening to the dialogue through a universal translator for Peter Quill, right? I don't think that's ever been formally confirmed, but it's such a great theory and it makes so much sense.
It makes so much sense
when you think about the jokes and the dialogue and just everything that happens in this film. I mean, this is Peter's story and he's telling it,
Yeah,
or at least we're
Guardians
hearing it
2,
through. Yeah.
As much as Guardians 2 is Peter's story, this is his story too.
Yeah. Well, let's get into rankings and ratings before we get too off the rails here. I think George, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, now I'll take the lead.
Sure.
Like I said at the beginning, I love this movie. It's so much fun. It is just the MCU close to its best, I think. And in a similar manner that I scored the Avengers from 2012, I'm going to score this one because it is cool to see, even though we haven't met these characters before, it's cool to see all these characters coming together and interacting for the first time, in the first time that we're meeting them as an audience. So I'm going to give it a 90 out of 100, which is the same score that I gave the Avengers. But while I gave the Avengers and how cool it is to see all those characters interact for the first time the benefit of being in my top 10, Guardians of the Galaxy, while so much fun, which we've, the Rewatch drinking game, do a shot every time we've said fun in this episode. Probably be dead.
Probably a lot.
This film, it's got flaws. This is the first real look at Thanos we're getting, but he doesn't really fit into the story that much. You've got Nebula and Gamora, you've got Ronan. How does Thanos really fit in? Does he need to be here? Not my place to say. Ronan could have served as the big bad of the movie. Nebula was a pretty big bad in the movie. You don't know where Yondu comes down at this point. You don't know where the Nova Corps come down at this point.
Up until a certain point, Gamora.
Yeah. So there are a lot of, I don't know if I would say decisions I'd make differently, because I wouldn't make a lot of decisions differently about this film. It's pretty great. But this film, I'm gonna throw it 11th out of 32. Really, it's more like if I were doing a top 10, the Avengers would be 10A and Guardians would be 10B. But since we're not doing that, I would say 11 out of 32. Max, over to you.
Perfect. So I'm.
You heard it, folks. He said perfect. It's 1 out of 32 and 100 out of 100.
Yeah, that's it. Episode over. That's it.
See you tomorrow.
Yep. No, it's right. Like George said, it is a film with flaws, and we've mostly focused on the good stuff here. As we normally try to do. We try to keep things positive. But my ranking, it falls just outside the top 10, and that's just because, I think the strength of my top 10, few of which I've named, it's just it's a little bit short, and so it's number 12 for me out of 32. And taking nothing away from this film, a lot of fun. And I have to grade it as such, so I'm giving it an 88. It's a very high B plus. Such a great film, a lot of fun, essentially rewatchable at all times. Like, I could sit down and watch this and be totally fine and have lots of fun no matter what.
Something that I would enjoy independent of a full rewatch, which I think is what makes a good MCU movie.
Yeah. I can't give it extra points for that out of fairness to the other projects, but 88, 12 out of 32. And yeah, I mean, I think that's going to do it for us tonight. We're going to come back to you tomorrow with Avengers Age of Ultron, which I know will be interesting after talking about the past two absolute bangers of a film in Winter Soldier and Guardians of the Galaxy. I know George liked that one. But yeah, we'll see you tomorrow talking about Avengers Age of Ultron. But that's it from us. Good night.
Night.